Good morning, everybody, and it genuinely is a real pleasure to be back on the island. It seems like I've never been away, and in fact, I barely have. I was here last week as well, but always a pleasure to be here. It says it up there, immediate outcome number 1. I want you to concentrate during the next 25, 30 minutes on the question underneath it. Is this a burden to all of us, or is it actually a wonderful opportunity? And I really do ask you, keep thinking about this as we move on. I also want to qualify a little bit why I'm stood up here, because I want to make very plain, I am not a FATF assessor in any way, shape or form, never have been and have no plans to be. I was called back in 1997. I've been a member of the authority on the board since 2018. What I want to stress, and I think this is deeply relevant, is the kind of work I've been doing over that intervening 27 years. I've been countering illicit financial flows, the threats that we're all so consumed by at the moment, through a wide range of functions. But always as part of a collaborative effort. It's meant working in both the public and the private sectors. It's meant working across intelligence, investigation, prosecution, asset recovery functions. Basically the complete chain, and I do want to stress that it is a chain, and it doesn't matter how strong any of the links in each component of that chain are, one weak one will bring the entire thing down. When I first started at the bar back in 1997, FATF was just 8 years old. Money laundering was a mystery to most, and I include those in law enforcement and in the law and on the bench. In addition to that, it was also somewhat of an irritation to many. It was regarded as this frustrating element. Recovery was virtually never happening, and when it did, it became an irritation to those involved in the confiscation process at the end of an already very long trial process. Today, I think it's fair to say, certainly in this room, AML is going to be broadly, and I'm pretty sure very deeply, understood. Proceeds of crime, as we've already heard from several individuals this morning, are routinely pursued. And as we all demonstrate very ably, that irritation of 27 years ago has become a global industry. So that's also a demonstration of the fact that this whole process has accelerated. So when I heard somebody say a couple of weeks ago, oh, we're coming towards the end of a long road, I gasped in horror. There is no end to this road. It will go on forever. And if we don't keep pace, we will never, ever be capable of catching up or getting ahead. So I also want to stress that the work I've been doing during that period has not been driven by either keeping somebody off a grey list or a blacklist, nor has it been about getting somebody off one of those lists. It's been done to materially enhance capacity. It's been done to generate genuine effectiveness. It's been done ultimately in the name of enabling economic stability to ensure security. And that's where it is relevant, because it's a common goal. It's a goal we share with FATF. So that's roughly what we're going to be looking at today. And I want to stress at the outset that this whole session really is not actually about money val. It's about safeguarding the consumer, safeguarding your industries, safeguarding and maintaining confidence in this island's economy. A wonderful byproduct of commitment to that is, of course, endorsement by Moneyval when they finally visit. So please also keep that very much in mind. This is that objective. This is that common goal that I'm talking about. At the authority, we're very clear that we are there to try very hard to ensure that we protect the consumer, that we reduce financial crime, and that we maintain confidence in the island's economy. I am pretty sure everybody in this room can see that those three objectives are very closely aligned with this one. So achieving those will materially contribute to achieving success in FATF's eyes. So we all know about the three intermediate outcomes. I'm not going to dwell on those now. But the immediate outcome is what we're here to think about today. We need to accurately assess risk. We have to understand materiality when we're doing so. We need to ensure that the policies that are generated reflect those accurately identified risks and that they're implemented effectively, and we can demonstrate the effectiveness of that implementation. And I just want to be clear, that last point about implementing really is critical, because we can do all this work, we can implement, we can be effective, but unless we can communicate our accurately defined risk, our superb policy response, and our expert coordination of effort to ensure that those risks are treated, unless we communicate that, we are still nowhere. So, I wanted to address a few of the gaps and issues that I see on a regular basis when I'm out in any and all of the jurisdictions in the regions that have already been mentioned by Dan this morning. It's really important to recognize IO1's significance. I don't want to overstate this, but I do think it's fair to say, feel free to correct me, anybody in the audience, particularly the assessors amongst you. I do think it's important to understand the cascade effect from Immediate Outcome 1. When you identify risk accurately, obviously your policies and your implementation that flow from that should be more effective than if you had misidentified the risk in the first place. And for this reason, there is an enormous emphasis on understanding what your specific risks are, how those relate to your industry, your sector, how those play into the national risk. That's the big materiality, the big context question. But we have to answer that correctly. There are many jurisdictions who failed to accurately identify their own risk and associated materiality. And that has tainted every other thing they've done. Get this one right, and you stand a very good chance of getting a lot more right. National cooperation and coordination. I'm not going to stop banging on about this throughout the entire piece. I'm sure the panel will reinforce this. Terry Stephen has already brought it to our attention with the FCP piece this morning. It really can't be understated. I've mentioned the chain already. If we don't take a chain-linked approach to treating AML, we can't treat AML. It's simply not possible to do this in isolation. Investigators need intelligence. Intelligence need industry. Industry needs to know that where it's identified its risk and created its policies, they're generating the intelligence through whatever schemes it's put in place to feed back through suspicious transaction reports, through a financial crime partnership structure. So that chain is critical. The accurate identification of risk, please do. I'm not going to name names. I don't think it's right and proper in this environment. You've only got to put those two things into Google and it will throw up a host of jurisdictions whose reports are deeply flawed in relation to this area. It's really important to get this right. It's also a living work. Risk is dynamic. What was a risk 6 months ago may not actually have fully evolved or not evolved in the way we think. And another risk, which wasn't even in anybody's blue sky box, has suddenly exploded. So for those reasons, this has to be an ongoing project, not just for government, not just for regulatory and industry bodies, but for all of us to be constantly rethinking whether we've got our assessment right or not. And that obviously, if you have a dynamic approach to risk evaluation, you need to let that bleed through into your policies. They must reflect those changes. And ideally, you will be able to evidence later on why those changes were made and how effective they have been. But being able to show that continuum, the thought process behind why you are taking a particular action today, will be deeply persuasive for an assessor. They will look at you and recognize that here is somebody who has this very much at the forefront of their mind, who is committed to the task of treating this threat. It's really important to see this as an ongoing commitment and not a hurdle that needs to be leapt and that you can then retire for a coffee or a beer after for another few years. Data presentation is something I'm going to come to in more detail in a couple of minutes, but I think it's fair to say it's worth highlighting now, because how you present it is absolutely critical in telling your story effectively. And the collaboration point, I hope by now, is becoming as clear as possible. Why is any of this important? The first thing it says there is listing. I want to put something before that, which is arguably much more significant. This is important because this island is an international financial center, and it has consumers who trust in its product and industries. That consumer needs to maintain that confidence. Your businesses need to maintain their viability and flourish beyond that. That's what this is really about. That's why everything that we're going to say today is relevant. But again, that byproduct is if we don't fully commit to this process, if we don't accurately identify risk, tell our story in a convincing, deeply compelling way, and evidence it, then listing is a possibility. And the consequence of listing is deeply serious. People will glibly talk about the risk of capital flight. But I want to genuinely ask everyone in this room a question now. What do people here think might be the impact on GDP of listing? Anybody want to hazard a guess? Bit of an auction here. Someone knows the answer to this. Anyone? 12. That is wonderful to hear, because that is the higher end of it. But it's worth remembering that whilst you will commonly see figures bandied about of around 7 to 8%, those are for jurisdictions which often are not international financial centres. The impact on a international financial centre is invariably, obviously, greater than that of a jurisdiction which doesn't have financial services front and centre driving its economy. So the reality is you can look at I can remember a jurisdiction that was listed back in 2008. Today's estimate is they lost 38 billion from their GDP. That represented just shy of 11% of their GDP. So well done to the gentleman at the front. He was very, very close. It's really serious. But when you hear about everything that's being done, and I'm regularly updated on a lot of this, it's very clear that the island is working exceptionally hard to ensure that this is not a matter that we have to worry about overly. This is something which, with the right amount, and that means everybody's nose is to the grindstone on this, full time, for a long time to come, if we do that, we can stay on top. How do we do it? We've talked about collaboration a lot. Terry's talked about it a lot. And he's identified who he's already got working alongside him within FCP. I'm going to draw your attention to all of these entities which appear in well-established PPPs in jurisdictions I've worked with. I'm sure you see yourself featuring somewhere on here. Now, it may be that you're already represented at FCP by your industry body, and that's fantastic. What I would say is, in my experience, your industry body won't necessarily always reflect your firm's beliefs, views. So it is extremely important to encourage your industry bodies to consult on any matters that relate to this. It doesn't have to be in the very heavy-duty formal consultation style that many of us are used to. It might be a roundtable discussion, for instance. But it is important that if your participation in FCP is through an industry body, that your industry body accurately reflects your concerns, your identification of risk, and your potential remedies. So storytelling, this is ultimately what it's about, because everybody in this room is working very hard already to do everything I've already talked about. But if you don't share this story really well, it can diminish the impact that all this fantastic work will ultimately have. So I'm going to ask another question now. What do you think the single biggest challenge is? Any thoughts? What makes this story quite difficult to tell? Data, great response. Absolutely. We've got masses of the stuff. It looks wildly different every way you look at it. Anything else? Perspective. Absolutely. So please feed in now if you've got more, because I think you're about to see what you're going to say on the slides, but I'd love to hear it. Collaboration. Absolutely. 100%. I'm just going to stick on that point for 1 minute. So I think most people in this audience are old enough to remember Jack and Ori, a wonderful story time show that we all used to indulge in as children at late afternoon, early evening. For those of you that are too young, Google it. Jack and Ori was a story, a short story told by a brilliant voice, a brilliant storyteller who was able to enthrall the audience. It was one perspective with one lot of data being spoken by a wonderfully convincing voice. The challenge is the assessors are going to hear many voices with many data sets, with many perspectives on this. Somehow we have to manage to create through all of this a single narrative with a single compelling voice. It's a cliche, but basically we need to be singing from the same hymn sheet. So, most of you know what this is. This is one of my favorite pictures and events of all time. For those of you who don't know, and for our visitors from overseas, this is the Royal Navy Field Gun Tournament. You used to be able to see it at the Royal Tournament year in, year out. Now it's down at HMS Collingwood. But it's teams of 18 people disassembling and reassembling a field gun, carrying it over an obstacle course, at which point it's positioned, ready to engage with the enemy, and it has to successfully fire 3 times in order for you to win. Okay? To me, this is the embodiment of what everybody in this room and beyond are challenged with on this island now. It's a race which requires immense levels of teamwork. It requires extraordinary discipline. It requires speed and agility. Things will happen that no one wanted to happen. Wheels will literally fall off. They have to go back on. And not only does it have to look right, that's the technical bit, it has to fire. It has to be effective. And for these reasons, I think it really is a wonderful vision to keep in your mind when at those moments when it's 11 o'clock at night and you're receiving another request to fire in more input in relation to identifying a particular risk. You're part of this, and it won't work without you. So, what does bad storytelling look like? And I should probably have just come to this presentation and shown you the next 2 slides. But these really are what you've all been thinking. People have shown this. Look, unavailable data. If it's not there, at least have an explanation why and make it a compelling and true one. Incomplete data. That's worrying. That raises all kinds of questions in an assessor's head. Why is it incomplete? Now, if the place burned down the night before, that's a different matter, but you ought to have had it digitally stored somewhere and you can go and find it from somebody else. This is just absolutely critical that you don't have these problems occurring when you tell your story. Inconsistent data. This is epic. It's one thing not to have it. It's another thing to be claiming this when the assessor was told that the day before, or worse still, the morning before. So this demands a lot of collaboration. You have to be clear that you're presenting the same information. Obviously, not every organization will be supplying the literally same data, but it has to reflect that island-wide position. Aged. Nobody's interested really in what went on 15 years ago, if that was the last time you had a really great result on something. It needs to be current, but that slice, if it's really small, also lacks compulsion. It needs to be current, but with spread that reflects the fact that this is something that you've been working on for a long time and building up. That's the insufficient time span point. Inconsistent definitions. Everybody agreeing this could be as simple as a terminology sheet, which is drawn up by one generous body and then distributed to everybody else so that everybody's working from the same dictionary for assessment purposes. And it will actually make life very much easier once the assessment's over. I've already mentioned earlier in the slides about the importance of narrating how that dynamic risk evaluation has influenced policy change. Mapping that, very important. And if there are whole stages of the process missing, I would hope that's something that people will be hurriedly working on in the next break. I wouldn't expect that to be the case at this stage. What does a good story look like? Well, we've talked about it already, Jackanory. But concrete things you can do around this are mapping your ecosystem. Do you know how you relate to your particular sector, how your sector relates to the industry, how the industry feeds into the overall economy? If you understand that ecosystem, the powers that various bodies have within it, and the sanctions that those bodies also possess, this is a really valuable insight which will ease your own burden in future years enormously, as well as demonstrating that you understand exactly where you sit in this whole ecosystem. Statistics, somebody mentioned it a moment ago, all of those things need to be clear. The one I'm going to draw out is the third one, consistent. If there are inconsistencies, explain them. That ties in with the fourth one up from the bottom, honesty and mitigation. Hiding things is never an answer. Fronting up about shortcomings and failures and identifying how you responded, how you have learned from it, and how you will be treating those situations in the future is actually deeply encouraging for assessors. Media. How do you respond in a media context? Something always controversial to talk about, so I'll keep it brief. Public notices. So many jurisdictions don't make the use that I see made here of public notices, whether it be on a settled basis or on a non-settled basis. These are incredibly powerful tools, not for illustrating to assessors that you are doing what you say you do and you're letting the world know about it, because it's a really important learning tool for wider industry. I've seen public notices which have public statements, which have clear learning points listed at the bottom of them. And that's all it's really about. Constant evolution, improvement. That's what they want to see. I'm going to keep this very brief because I'm over time. 3 things I wanted to draw out. we'll go to C first. I've just mentioned public notices, public statements. Jurisdiction I was in not that long ago referred me to the fact that they don't actually name entities on public statements. How does that protect the consumer? How does that reduce financial crime? How does that ultimately maintain confidence in an economy? It's not able to contribute to any one of those three objectives because there is no real consequence. So that's one learning point I would really, really press. Another, de-risking. Everybody in this room has seen, or many people in this room will have seen, the development of the Isle of Man as an international financial centre. And they will want to protect that. They will fiercely want to protect that. And they do not want to see a de-risked economy. So this isn't about sacrificing everything to a positive assessment and losing your economic edge in the process. It's about achieving both favourable outcomes, one helping the other. Coordination and recovery. We've talked about collaborative groups. We've talked about who could, who should, who might want to be in them. Never lose sight of one thing, though. We are all individuals. And it's our personal responsibility as players in this arena to acknowledge that sometimes a coordinating function or a particular entity might not be fully representing those thoughts. Raise them. If something worries you, bring it to the attention of the process that this entire regime will have brought about. Lone voices often bring about incredible change, especially when there is a deeply collaborative environment in which to develop them. So on that note, I thank you all for your very kind attention and a bit of participation in there to make sure everybody's still awake, and wish everybody, including ourselves, the very best in the process ahead. Dan, thank you.
Thank you so much, Leam Thompson.